I'm reading an interesting book right now. I'm kind of on a biography kick, and I'm reading a book on Lincoln. And interesting, in the presidential election of 1860, Lincoln, the way he got the nomination wasn't because everybody liked him. It was more because there were several different guys, and all of their supporters didn't like any of the other guys, so they chose Lincoln because he was not as bad as the other guy, which is interesting because most consider him now to be the greatest president we've ever had, and the way he came to gain the Republican nomination that year was kind of because he was the second choice of everybody. But he became the nominee for the Republicans, and he went around touring and speaking all over the country at the time. But some of his opponents were doing the same thing. And there were several different major political parties of the time. I think there were 4 major political parties at the time, because the nation was at such a tipping point between the North and the South. There was the Republican Party that was brand new. It had just started. And then there was the Northern Democrats, there were the Southern Democrats, and there was a 4th party, but I can't remember what the 4th one was. But anyway, the nominee for the Northern Democrats was a guy named Stephen Douglas. And Stephen Douglas was famous at this time. Actually, he was probably a more famous politician than Lincoln was. But Lincoln and Douglas, their names have been linked to history because they were opponents to each other for a long time, going around and doing the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They would go and they would campaign together, not during this time, but in a previous election. And their campaigning together would be, basically, they would have a very public debate between each other. Not in the sense of the debates we have today on TV with politicians where, it's 90 seconds of sound bites followed by 60 seconds of sound bites followed by 30 seconds of sound bites. Back then, it was them questioning each other, not guided by a moderator, but just going after each other. So I'm sure it was very entertaining. And they didn't speak for little sections. They spoke for 60 minutes or 90 minutes at a time, followed by a rebuttal. So how would you like to sit through that? Anyway, so they would do this, and Lincoln and Douglas would tour together, so they knew each other fairly well. Well, as that election of 1860 was going, it began to become very clear, because of the polls they had at the time, that Lincoln was going to win. And so Stephen Douglas, the Northern Democrat, what he did, realizing that he was not going to win, is he didn't necessarily give up on his campaign, but he did something for the sake of America that isn't widely known. Is he changed his entire format from "come and vote for me" to, from that point where he made that realization he's not going to win, he began to tour all of the southern states and not say, "come and vote for me." He didn't even go and make statements about slavery, which was the main issue of the moment. He went through the southern states and begged for the southern states not to leave the Union. That's what he did. He didn't say, Lincoln is terrible, Lincoln is bad. He would go and he would say, if Lincoln wins, you guys do not need to leave the Union. You guys don't need to leave the United States. You don't need to secede. And he was met with hostile crowds everywhere he went. Heckling, catcalling, name-calling, people throwing things at him while he's doing his speech. Can you imagine a politician doing that today? Because I can't. Going and realizing I'm not going to win, but sacrificing everything for the sake of the country. And so he goes and he tours down there, risking his life, telling everyone, don't leave, don't leave. No matter what happens, don't leave. We can still work together. Don't leave. And we know what happened. Civil War broke out. The southern states seceded from the Union. And the whole battle was fought. The whole war was fought, the Civil War. Lincoln held the Union together at times, it seemed like, with his bare hands. And slavery was abolished. Lincoln won a second term, and the Union was secured. But what I want to focus on is what Stephen Douglas did. Even though he realized the outcome was not going to be what he anticipated, he still fought with great faith for America. He still fought for America. Because his faith in the political system and the governmental system was in America, not in the outcome that he wanted to win the election, but in securing the union, being unified together. He had faith in that, even if the outcome of the election was not going to be what he desired. What we're going to see today in Daniel chapter 3. So if you want to go ahead and turn there, you can turn to Daniel chapter 3. I believe it's on page 739 on the Bible in front of you on the rack, or the YouVersion Bible app, or use your smartphone. Go to dequeen.church/Sunday. You can find it all there. But in Daniel chapter 3, we're going to see that exact same thing. Having great faith, even though the outcome may not be what you anticipate or even desire. You see, in the book of Daniel, something interesting is going on. The nation of Israel has wandered away from God, and started doing things that were very much anti-God. They were worshiping other gods. They were doing despicable things in their worship of other gods. And so God sent prophet after prophet to the nation of Israel and says, guys, you've got to change what you're doing, because if you keep doing this bad stuff, other nations are going to come and you're going to be destroyed. And Israel would say, nah, we're fine. Everything's fine. Life is good. At one time, a prophet would come, I think it was Jeremiah, and he said, guys, you got to change, or it's about to happen, and our nation's going to be destroyed. And right next to him, another prophet comes up, and he says, no, God spoke to me. Everything's great. Keep living your lives. It's perfect. Now, if you're in Israel, which one would you want to listen to, right? And so they listened to the other prophet and not Jeremiah, and the nation ended up being conquered. And so Babylon comes in. The nation of Babylon, and conquers, and in their conquering, they look at all of the people, and they see all of the healthy people, the smart people, the cream of the crop, and they grab them as prisoners of war, POWs, and they take them back to their own country, to Babylon, to their capital, and they leave everybody else there, and they take only the best, basically to brainwash them with the Babylonian culture, because they want to better themselves as a nation, and so they only would bring in the best of all the other nations they would conquer to help strengthen themselves. And in among those were 4 guys that the book of Daniel is about. Daniel, obviously, he's one of those. Then you've got some friends of his, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, in the process of them being in the midst of being trained in the Babylonian culture, these 4 guys showed themselves out to be better than everyone else. If everyone else is the cream of the crop, these are even more cream than those other guys. These are the best. This is the whipped cream of the cream. These are the best of the best. Everybody wants these guys. They're the smartest. They're the wisest. They've been blessed by God in supernatural ways, and they get promoted because of that. All 4 of them. Daniel gets the biggest promotion, because he gives the king a prophecy of something that's going to happen. The king had a dream. Daniel gives a prophecy about the dream, because in the dream, the king saw this big idol, this big statue with a gold head. And Daniel said in the Spirit of God, the gold head is you, king. You are the gold head. You are gold. And well, the king took that and does something we're about to see. And so the king likes what Daniel says, promotes him to second in the nation over the palace and everything, and then takes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and promotes them up really, really high in the government over different areas of the government. And what's interesting about that is he doesn't just promote them over a bunch of other Jews, a bunch of other Israelites. He promotes them over a bunch of other Babylonians. He gives them a promotion that other guys were yearning for, that other guys were working for. And he makes those Babylonians report to these Jews, these prisoners of war. And those Babylonians don't like this. And that's going to play into what we see here in Daniel chapter 3. So Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 1. So King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. Now a cubit was about 1.5 feet. So this thing is 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. Huge. He put this on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, actually, archaeologists have found a massive pedestal. It's about 20 feet tall, right near where Babylon used to be. And they believe that is the pedestal that this actual statue was set up on. So if the pedestal was 20 feet tall and the statue was 90 feet tall, and this is just a few miles away from the city of Babylon on a plain where nothing else is nearby, you could look out from any window in Babylon towards that direction and you would see this massive structure that they built. And so the king builds this thing out there. Now you see, it says he made the image out of gold. Remember, he just heard a prophecy that said he is the gold head of his dream. He is a great king. He's the best. He's the gold. And so he makes an entire statue out of gold saying, look at how great I am. And he sets this thing up out there. Verse 2. King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So he sends a message throughout the entire kingdom of Babylon over all the countries that they've captured. And he tells all the government officials, he says, all of you, I want you to come as we dedicate this statue that I've built. Everybody, this is hundreds of people. Some people think thousands and thousands of people, the government employees of this nation. Everybody get together and we're going to dedicate this thing and celebrate how great I am in building this massive statue. And so everybody comes. Verse 3. The satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, and all of the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So picture it in your mind. Out in the middle of a plain, middle of a field, you've got this big 90-foot statue on a 20-foot platform, and all of these thousands of people who are gathered around it. It's quite a sight. Verse 4. The herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. So it's kind of a warped version of musical chairs, right? You hear the music, you fall down and you worship the image. Now they weren't told what they were just coming for dedication, and now they're told as they're gathered around this giant statue, as soon as the music starts playing from apparently a wide assortment of instruments, I mean bagpipe thrown in there, but it's all there. And he says, as soon as the music plays, everybody falls down, everybody worships this thing. And if you don't, we're going to throw you in a furnace. Now we know the furnace, if you've ever heard the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you know that. Well, history tells us that that was one of Nebuchadnezzar's favorite forms of execution. That wasn't just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He did this on the routine. He would take guys who he didn't like, and he would just toss them in a furnace. That's how he would kill people more than any other way. And it's even more interesting here because this is a giant gold statue being dedicated, right? And so out there near the statue had to be a furnace to melt the gold for the statue. And so next to the statue, off to the side, all the construction supplies, is a big furnace. And what history tells us is it's got a top, and it would come down to a bulb at the bottom, have an opening at the top with some sort of scaffolding so they could come and drop stuff in the top, and then a door at the bottom so they could throw in more wood to make it hotter. And so that's the image. Is off to the side, you got the furnace, and then over here you got the statue. And everybody knows, all these officials have probably seen themselves, Nebuchadnezzar, throw people in a furnace before. And so now they say, you bow down and worship, and some of them probably questioning in their heart, or you will be thrown in that furnace right there. Oh, okay, yeah, well, we're bowing down for sure. And this is getting ready to happen. Everybody's thinking about this. Everybody's, their hearts are beating fast. They want to make sure the king sees that they're bowing down. And there's no question that they're going to not bow down because they don't want to be in the furnace. Verse 7. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So all those thousands of people, that throng, that massive group of people in one accord, I picture try to beat each other to the ground. Who can get there the fastest? And they're bowing before this giant statue, this giant golden statue out in the middle of this field. But not everybody does. Verse 8. Therefore at that time, certain Chaldeans. Now, Chaldean, that's another word for Babylonian. It's just a different word, same meaning, same group of people. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music will fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship will be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Now, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." So guys come up, Babylonians, come up to the king, and they say, "You told everybody to bow down and worship this thing, and you are so great, king, and your benevolence and your mercy and your grace, setting this thing up is so fantastic, and we all bow down and we worship. But there's these three guys that you promoted over us Babylonians who are not bowing down." Now, you think about it, why didn't Nebuchadnezzar see these guys not bowing down? You think he would be angry having not seen somebody, but in a group of thousands and thousands of people, it's hard to see just three guys not doing something. And there's no telling, maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were short guys, and there were tall guys bowing down next to them, and you can't really tell the difference. And so the king just didn't see them not bowing down. And so these Babylonians come to the king, and it says, certain Babylonians. It's implied that these are guys, maybe these were the guys who should have gotten the promotions that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got. And now they have to report to these Jews. The way they say it there, the way it's worded, is very derogatory. It's not very kind. It's kind of racist a little bit. It says, "You promoted these Jews over us, and they're not bowing down to you. They're not obeying the law and doing what you want them to do. These guys are out there doing that." And so we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are God worshipers. These are people who believe in God's purpose here in the world. And they're facing an impossible situation. The king wants them to bow down and worship an idol when God specifically told them, don't ever bow down and worship an idol. Don't ever do it. Don't even make an idol of me. He said, don't bow down to an idol. You worship me only and nothing else. And so they're told this. So they're facing an impossible situation. They either bow down or they die. And now they're coming up against immovable opposition. Guys who don't like them, guys who are angry at them. So they've got an impossible situation. They've got immovable opposition. How are they going to respond? How are they going to react in the moment? This anger and jealousy and racism that is coming against them, how are they going to respond to this confrontation, this situation? These guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they've been tremendously blessed by God following a crazy amount of trauma that they faced. Imagine an army coming into Duquesne, conquering and burning the city to the ground, and then taking not everybody, but taking some of us away. Maybe half of your household they would take away to their country, and you would never see them again. And these guys are the guys who've been taken away, and they're having to live with that. But now God has blessed them. The terrible thing has happened, and God has blessed them, and they feel like they're safe. They're beyond the difficult moments. You know, we get that way sometimes. I don't know if you do. But, you know, you go through a struggle, maybe a health issue, maybe a financial issue, and or something with your job. You feel like you're on the other side of the hard thing, the difficult thing. But then you get a blessing from God, and you've moved beyond, and something incredible happens. But then the hard thing comes back and circles back around and hits you even harder than it did before. And that's where they are. That's where they are. Their lives were threatened, they were saved, and they were blessed and promoted, and now it's back to where it is, and their lives are at stake here. And they have to deal with that, this hard thing that has confronted them. You know, something we know just from experience, but Scripture tells us as well, is that life is not easy. Life is not easy. And if anybody tells you life is easy, they're lying to you. Life is not easy. Every element of it is difficult. There may be moments of blessing here and there, but life itself is not easy. But God is with us. Life is not easy, but God is with us. Jesus tells us in John chapter 16 that in this world you will have trouble, but take heart because I have overcome the world. We know that he is with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. So even though that the world is hard and life is not easy, God is with us every step of the way. And so we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego facing this difficult moment in life, confronted with terrible difficulty, terrible problems, but they know that God is with them. God was with them when the city was conquered. God was with them when their families were slaughtered. God was with them when they were taken into the prison, when they were being brainwashed. God was with them when they were blessed. And now God is still with them in the plain of Dura, in the shadow of this massive gold monstrosity as they are going to be taken before this angry, bitter king now. God hasn't left them. Look at verse 13. Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. So Nebuchadnezzar is angry. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody in a furious rage before, but somebody in uncontrollable anger. And Nebuchadnezzar is there, and this is the guy who has authority to kill anybody he wants. And he calls Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three of his favorite guys. We see in the way he speaks to these guys and the opportunities he gives these guys, he likes them a lot. But he is in a furious rage at them in the moment. Verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you did not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, are you ready to fall down and worship the image that I have made? Well and good. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Now, what is fascinating here is this is Nebuchadnezzar, man who we know is a hard man, a difficult man, an angry man. He does not give second chances. But here he is giving these three guys who are prisoners of war, who he promoted, he's giving them a second chance. Quite possibly in front of their accusers, the guys he promoted them over. He's giving them a second chance. If his pattern would suggest if he's told these guys have disobeyed you, disobeyed the law, then they should have not come to him. They should have immediately been tossed into the furnace. But he brings them in and he questions them. Is it true? Did you really not do it? And then he says, I'm going to give you a second chance. We're going to play the music again. We got all the thousands of people waiting, but we're going to play all the music again just for you and give you a second chance. We see, this is how much he likes these guys. He says, I'm going to give you a second chance. Just do it. Just come on, guys. I mean, just bow down right here. And bygones will be bygones. He says, well and good. It'll be done. If you don't, I got to throw you in the furnace. Come on, guys. Just bow down. That's all it takes. Even though he's given them a second chance, they're not going to change what they've already done. They're going to continue to stand up for God instead of bowing down to lesser things. And the same is true for us. Sometimes it may seem, if we're given a moment like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we would all like to think we would stand up for God. If somebody says, you deny God, you bow down to this other image, or you're going to die, we'd all like to think we would stand up for God. We would all like to think we would. Right? It might be easier to do it in a public setting like that when we're put on the spot. But when it comes to lesser moments day by day, oftentimes I find myself not standing up for God as much as I would in that moment. Because we're given opportunities always. Whether it's, will I stand up for God? Or a lesser thing, will I sleep? Hit the snooze button again. Will I stand up for God or bow down or lay down and sleep instead of standing up for God and spending time with Him? Will I bow down to my phone or stand up to God? Will I bow down to somebody of the opposite sex, or will I stand up for God? Now you say, well, you're not really worshiping those things. But if we're giving more attention to those things than we're giving to God, yeah, we're kind of putting them in the place in our hearts that God should be. And here was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had to make a decision before they walked out onto the plane in their own personal lives that they would stand up for God. Because if they're already standing up for God in their own personal lives every day, and even the little decisions, standing up for God in the big decisions won't be that difficult because it will already be spiritual muscle memory in what they're doing. And so we also need to make that decision ourselves. Will I stand up for God in my work, or will I bow down to my work? Will I stand up for God and spend time with God and dedicate time to God with my family, or will I bow down to sports and dedicate time for our family for sports, maybe sports of our kids or sports on TV, or will I stand up for God? Will I stand up for God, or bow down to parties, or bow down to pride, or bow down to self-promotion, or one we all struggle with because we're human and we're American? Will I stand up for God, or will I bow down to control? Having control over my life, having control over my finances, having control over my schedule, having control over a conversation. And having control over a conversation, that is when we're in a conversation with somebody and we're not really listening to what they're saying. We're listening to how we can respond to what they're saying, and we're getting ready to interrupt what they're saying because we don't really care what they're hearing. We care about what we're going to say. We're wanting to control the situation, control the conversation. We want to control the political system, the political landscape. We want to control what people say on social media. We want to control, if everyone was under my control, the world would be great. We may not say it like that out loud, but we think it in our actions and our words. In our conversations, we talk about somebody, man, if they would have done this, then that what they need to do is this. You know, they've got this going on in their family, but I tell you what they need to do. They need to do what I'm telling you right now, and everything will be good in their lives. Everything will be fixed. We're wanting to control them. If we would stop bowing down to control and stand up for God in the moment and start praying for that situation rather than commanding what we say to be done, then our heart would begin to change. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had to stand up for God in their own private life behind closed doors before they could stand up for God out in public. Otherwise, standing up for Him out in public wouldn't carry the weight that it did for them. They would have crumbled under the pressure. But because they'd already been standing up for God in private, when it came to something public like this, it wasn't that difficult for them. They were already spiritually strong to bear up the weight of that pressure. So I must stand up for God in my own heart before I am strong enough to stand up for Him publicly. I must stand up for God in my own heart and make that decision. I will not bow down to sleep tomorrow. I will get up and spend time with the Lord. I will not bow down to control the conversation. I will stand up for God in my own thinking, in my own thought processes. I will not bow down to the sinful desires of my heart that say, try to sneak around and do this thing and get around the system and cheat things at work or cheat things at school or undermine my parents. I will stand up for God instead. Standing up for God in my own heart leads me to be strong enough to stand up for Him publicly. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up, literally standing up when thousands of people around them are not, seeing the fire jumping out of the furnace in the corner of their eye, knowing that is where they are headed. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." How much guts did that take, right? The king gives them a second chance and threatens them again of throwing them in the furnace. And they basically say, well, hey, king, we're not going to answer you. We have no need to answer. We've already answered you in our actions out there on the field. We don't have to answer you here in the room. I'm sure the king's not used to being spoken to like this. Verse 17, if this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Notice the confidence there. He will deliver us. He will deliver us. That is, they're claiming a promise there. He will deliver us out of your hand. Remember, the king just said, what God is there who's stronger than I am? What God is there who will rescue you from my hand? And they said, our God will rescue us from your hand. And then we get verse 18. Speaking with such faith and confidence in verse 17, they say, verse 18, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. What we see in their words that are a reflection of their heart is something extremely unique. They had great faith in God, that God is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. God will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if he doesn't, our faith isn't going to waver. Even if the outcome isn't what I want, my faith is only going to grow stronger. Because what they're communicating is that their faith isn't dependent upon the outcome of a situation. Their faith is dependent upon God, who has control over the situation. Oftentimes, I don't want to, put this on you. Oftentimes with me, I feel it in myself as well, that praying for a situation and the outcome doesn't come out like I wanted it to or hoped it would or anticipated it would. And my faith, not faith in salvation or faith in God, but gets a little shaky in the moment. Because what we tend to do is we put our faith in the outcome and not in God. And faith that is in the outcome of a situation isn't true faith. Isn't true faith. Faith depends on God, not on how I want the situation to come out. God knows better than I do. That's me wanting control again over the situation. It is when the situation doesn't turn out like I hoped or wanted or tried to manipulate to get it, then I get a little shaky in my faith. But if that's the case, then the faith wasn't rooted on solid ground, which is only Jesus. Faith has to be in Jesus. A faith that depends on an outcome of my plans rather than on the plans of the one in whom the faith is had is really no faith at all. If the faith is completely dependent upon the outcome of plans that I've made, then the faith is in me and not in God. But if my faith is in what God is able to do, what is in God's heart, God's love, God's grace, God's mercy, that is true faith. And that is faith that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had. So we have to ask ourselves in the moment, does this situation impact my faith? Does my own happiness impact my faith? Do my emotions about a moment impact my faith? If things turned out terrible, if I had to say verse 18, but if not, would I be able to say it with the great confidence and faith that they said? Yes, I believe God will do this thing and this will happen, but is it really because I believe God will do it or because simply I want it to happen? And if it doesn't happen, but if not, then will my faith crumble and I stop going to church and I stop reading my Bible and I stop praying as fervently as I did before, at least for a period or a season? Because if that happens, then my faith wasn't built on God. My faith was built on what I wanted to happen. And that isn't true faith. That's weak faith. That is human faith, faith in ourselves, faith in what we can see, not faith in the supernatural, not faith in the one who created the world, not faith in the God who introduced breath into your lungs. Not faith in the God. I read a story this week. This guy, he was in India, was declared dead at the hospital. Family had spent thousands and thousands of dollars. The guy was in a coma. Hospital came in and said, he's dead. Took him to the funeral home, took care of him, got ready to the funeral. They come into the funeral. People are coming in, and the guy wakes up in the coffin. Everybody freaks out. Somebody had the presence of mind to say, well, we need to take him to the hospital. And they did. And vitals were good. Everything was good. Breathing good. Heart pumping good. Circulatory. Everything fantastic. The God who can raise the dead is the God we need to have faith in. Not in the outcome that we want, because I am very much not as good as God. And so having faith in what I plan for a situation to turn out like is having faith in myself. And that kind of faith doesn't move mountains. That kind of faith can't mow the grass. Not even getting to the moving mountains business yet. Having faith in God, having faith in Jesus changes the world. And so these guys have this mountain-moving faith. They're standing up for God because they had a faith with deep roots. And a faith with deep roots cannot be upended by a momentary wind. A faith with deep roots cannot be upended by a momentary wind. If your roots go deep in your faith, then whatever life situation blows your way is not going to destroy it at all. Verse 19. So remember, Nebuchadnezzar was furious with rage. Now we have him in a whole new level of anger. Verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't know if you've ever done something and your mom looked at you and her face had changed and you knew that your life was about to end. You know what I'm talking about? I remember as a kid, my dad was a music minister, and so he'd be up on the platform of a church directing the music, and they had a choir. My mom was in the choir, and I can picture the church, Field Street Baptist Church, Cleburne, Texas. I was on the pew you guys are on, right there. I'd sit right about the middle because I would try to position myself so that the pulpit was between me and Mom. So if I was doing something, she couldn't see me. Well, this day, something had happened. They must have moved the pulpit because I got that look. And I dropped whatever I was doing and stopped, and I just froze because I pictured in my head, I had a flash, a prophetic vision about the end of the world. You see, with Dad being the music minister, Mom being in choir, if she left the choir loft and came and got me out of the service, I would not be here today. It would have been over. That would have been the end. That would have been. I remember one time I got in trouble so much, she took me home from church early. And I was begging her on the way home, just don't tell Dad. It's okay. We're good. That punishment, we're fine. And it didn't work. But if she came out of the choir loft, she gave me that look. This was like the last second warning, the warning shot over the bow of the ship. You better stop right now. So I immediately pulled out my Bible and held it up high enough that she could see it over the pew. Like, oh, that's what the pastor said. Oh, okay. And trying to make right. And so her face had changed against me in the moment. And that's what we have here. Nebuchadnezzar's face changed with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they knew it's over. This is it. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, as high as it would go. And he ordered some of the mighty men of the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. So they didn't even, put them in execution outfits. They just took them in all their clothes, so all their clothes would catch fire, and this thing would be over faster. He said, bring me the strongest men of the army, grab them, tie them up, carry them up that scaffolding, throw them in the top hole, and let them fall into the fire. And I want to see it happen. He's angry. He's filled with fury. Verse 22, because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace so overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the mighty men, the strong men, the bravest men of the army were even killed because of the heat of the furnace. The order was given so fast, everybody wanted to do their job as fast as possible because they didn't want to be thrown in the furnace too. So the guys throwing the logs in the fire, throwing in as many as it would fit, and the guys at the same time who were carrying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are trying to do that as fast as they can, and nobody's taking notice of safety. And so in taking them up there and throwing them in, those guys succumb to the heat, and they die right there on the spot. Verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. And they fall into the fire. In preparing for this today, I tried to put myself in their spot and tried to think, what would they be thinking in that moment as they're falling in? As they're falling into the fire? Well, this is it. This is the end. They get thrown. And so, it's not a small drop to go from the top of that thing to the bottom. They're falling. And they splat into the fire. And they land. At times, it may seem for us, going through a situation, a circumstance, that all hope is lost. It may feel like we're going through the last sentence on the last page of the last chapter of whatever this is. And this is the end. This is going to get the better of us this time. We're not going to be able to get out. This is final. It's over. And everything was against these guys. They said, our God is able to rescue us from the fiery furnace. He will rescue us from your hand. But rescue didn't come. And they fall into the fire. You see, sometimes, even though the world around us may be on fire, your story is not over if you stand with the king. The king. Not King Nebuchadnezzar, not somebody who has control over your life or has authority over you. But if it feels like the world is burning around you, your story's not over if you stand with the king. If you stand, even if you're falling in the flames are coming up around you and they're witnessing this and seeing the flames come up around you, and who knows the sensations they're feeling in the moment. We're going to see in a second what they actually felt. They weren't feeling anything as they fell in. If you've ever touched something extremely hot, you don't feel the heat at first, right? You don't feel it right away. And then it comes later. And they may be thinking that as they're falling in, well, I don't feel the heat, but I know it's coming. They see the guys on the scaffolding. As they're falling, the guys on the scaffolding die, and they're falling into the fire. And they're falling in, and it feels like everything is over, and this is the end. It's over now, but we know something's about to happen. Something's about to happen. Their story's not over because they stood for the king. They stood for the king out in the field when everybody else bowed down. They stood for the king when standing in front of a king who said, bow down or I'm going to make your life terrible. And they stood for the king in front of him and said, no, we're going to keep going the path God wants us to go. Even if it means our lives get terrible, we're still going to stand for what God wants us to stand for. And they fall into the fire because they stand with the king. And then, verse 24, and now the man who wrote down this book, Daniel, we believe it was Daniel, we see something interesting here. As a side note, you may wonder, why isn't Daniel here with them? Well, we find out earlier when he got his promotion, his job was in the palace, and so he's probably still in the palace. He wasn't out here with everybody else when they're bowing down to this idol. But Daniel's writing this down, and the way he writes is he writes Nebuchadnezzar's, the king's, response before he writes down what happens. Okay? And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown in the fire, and this is the king's reaction. Verse 24. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up with haste, and he declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? And they answered and said to the king, true, O king. And he answered, but I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. He says, so the king's watching all of this, and he's looking on with glee, having seen many executions himself because he ordered them all into furnaces. He's looking through that side door, and he says, hold up. He jumps up astonished, it says, out of his chair. He jumps out of his chair and says, wait a minute, there's 4 guys in there. And they're not tied up. They're just walking around in the middle of the fire. How? That's not possible. And that last guy's different than the other 3 guys because he looks like the son of the gods. And Babylon, they worshipped a whole bunch of gods. He says, that guy looks like a god. He looks divine. There's something way different about that. And every single scholar that I read, we believe that was Jesus walking in the fire with them. They are had to have a conversation with the Son of God hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before he was born into this world. And so Jesus is there, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego there, and they're walking in the fire, just walking around, having a conversation. Everything's cool. And the king is flipping out. How is this possible? This can't happen. They're supposed to be dead. He had just said moments ago, no one can rescue you. What God is going to rescue you out of my hand? I am all powerful. Look at my great statue. I am great. And the king says, that's impossible. But we know Luke chapter 1, nothing is impossible with God. We know from Matthew chapter 19, verse 26, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So walking in a fiery furnace is possible with God. That doesn't mean you should go out and try it tomorrow. That was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's calling in life, not yours. And so with God, all things are possible. And here it is. The presence of Jesus gives the ability to walk in the fire. The presence of Jesus gives the ability to walk in the fire. And it changed Nebuchadnezzar because he was watching it happen. A lot of times when we're going through a fiery situation, we're not at all thinking about anybody who's observing what's going on. We're all consumed in thinking about us and how this impacts us, and it does. If we're going through especially a health thing, it impacts who we are. It impacts our family. But Nebuchadnezzar was changed because he was watching how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked through the fire with Jesus. Walking with Jesus while your world burns will change anyone who is watching. Walking through the fire with Jesus will change anybody who's watching. And so if you are going through a situation, you need to walk through it with Jesus, not just for your own benefit, because it will give you strength, it will give you purpose, it will guide you through that. If His Spirit is in you and carrying you through it, His Spirit will be building you up. But in the same moment, walking with Jesus makes a difference for everybody else who's observing it. For your kids, for your grandkids, for your neighbors, for your friends, for your Sunday school class, for your church. If they're watching you go through a fire and you're walking through it in the presence of Jesus, it makes a complete difference in their lives just as much as it does in yours. Nebuchadnezzar, a man who despised Israel's God, jumps up in astonishment, and we're not going to be able to have time to read it, but you should read it. He jumps up and he praises their God. He praises their God, having just said that he himself is greater than any God in the world. He jumps up and he praises their God. What can that do to the people in your life if you walk through the fire with Jesus? Look at verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. He says the Most High God. He is now declaring God higher than him. Even though he said he is higher than all gods, he's now saying their God is higher than he is. He says, Most High God. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Verse 27. And the satraps, prefects, governors, king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their head was not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Not even the smell of fire. The other day, we were cooking out in the rain on July 4th. Anybody else try to cook out and it started raining on you? Only me. Well, I did, and it was raining. And I was standing out there with an umbrella trying to keep the grill dry, trying to keep it from cooling down. Anyway, Caleb was helping me. Liam came out and helped for a little while. We're trying to get it, and we finally did. The meat cooked. It was good. But even just being out there just for a second, getting the charcoal going, it had permeated my skin. And I got it going, walked back in the house, came back out to check it, and I could smell it on me, just having done it for a second. And I was not in it. I was away from it, and it was just a little bit. These guys were in the fire, and it says they didn't have any smell of the fire on them. No sign that they had walked through the fire because they had walked through the fire with Jesus. And because they had walked through the fire with Jesus, not only had they survived, they showed no sign of harm, no wound, no scars because of it. Jesus carried them through it because they walked through the fire under His power, not their own. They were not singed by the fire of the enemy because they had been seared by the fire of the Spirit. The fire of the Spirit burning within you will prevent any outside flame from harming you. If you have been seared by the fire of the Spirit, any fire outside of you trying to singe you, trying to bring you down, will not be able to touch you if the fire within you is stronger than the fire without. Relying on the Spirit, allowing Him to carry you and guide you and strengthen you, will prevent that outside fire from destroying you. You may feel harmed at times. You may feel struggling at times. Yes, absolutely. This world is not easy. Life is not easy. But if you have God, if you have Jesus, you will be able to walk through it without being destroyed. That's why Nebuchadnezzar was so astonished. He had killed so many people by using a furnace that now here's 3 guys who weren't even burned a little bit. Their clothes weren't blackened a little bit because of the fire. And so his main source of execution means nothing anymore because the God of these 3 men is more powerful than the tools of the enemy. The fire burning within you will change everything. And God spoke this in Isaiah 54, verse 17. I think I put that on there. There it is. No weapon that is fashioned against you will succeed. You will refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord and their vindication from me, declares the Lord. No weapon fashioned against you will succeed. No weapon, not just earthly weapon, no spiritual weapon the enemy brings against you will succeed, will have any success within you if you are guided by the Spirit, aided by the Spirit, filled with the Spirit. Those weapons will do nothing to you, nothing whatsoever. Those weapons will not succeed. You will refute any tongues, anybody who rises against you in judgment. And look at what he says. He says, this is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Their vindication from me. Their heritage, their inheritance. The things I give them, the legacy they leave, no weapon formed against them will succeed. That is the heritage I give them that they can pass on to others if they rely on my Spirit and are filled with my Spirit and guided by my Spirit. That verse was lived out in the life of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that day. No weapon that had been fashioned against them, physical or spiritual or otherwise, had success that day because they stood with God and they walked with Jesus. So where are you today? Are you walking with Jesus? Do you feel the flames of the world around you rising at times, or the pressure, or the expectations of others, or things that are overwhelming to you right now? It feels like a fire, and you're in the midst of it, and there's no way out. What we see in the lives of these guys isn't just some good, cute story in the Old Testament. This really happened. This is actual fact in history that happened. God delivered these guys through the fire because they walked with Jesus, both physically and spiritually in the Spirit. So how do you get through the fire? Walk with Jesus. You may need to walk with Him for the first time. Believe that He is God's Son. He rose from the dead. So all your sins are forgiven. You live forever if you believe. And you get to walk with Him every day now. So no matter what fire raises or comes up tomorrow, you're able to walk through it because you've got Jesus today. So walk through the fire with Jesus. Supernatural power. Firewalker. He's the firewalker. And if we're with Him, we're able to accomplish the impossible. Walking through the fire because He's able to do it through us.